Hi guys, welcome to this discussion where I'm going to talk about a lot of interesting stuff with respect to the first heart sound, third heart sound, fourth heart sound, and then I'm going to talk about the JVP as well, and we're going to do linkage of the JVP with the heart sounds and the ECG. So the first thing on the agenda would be to talk about first heart sound, which is characterized by mitral and tricuspid valve closure. And the questions that are asked on this topic are, I would say, more on the lines of intensity as compared to the splitting. What I imply by the intensity is that the question will either say loud S1 is seen in all except or soft S1 is seen in all except. The logic to be remembered is that the intensity is directly proportional to the speed of closure of the valves. That implies that if a person is having tachycardia, there would be a presence of a loud S1. In contrast, if I speak about conditions having bradycardia, there will be a soft S1. In multiple choice questions, however, because this would be too easy for you to handle, so he can utilize a law of ECG. One of the laws of ECG is that PR interval in the ECG is always inversely related to the heart rate. So if you're going to be having, let me say, a condition contributing to short PR interval, just go by the mathematics here. Short PR interval implies tachycardia, and therefore there would be a loud S1. Now, conditions having tachycardia can also be like congestive heart failure. In fact, sympathomimetic stimulation predominates in heart failure. So you have sweating even when the air conditioning is on. The patient would be having diaphoresis, and tachycardia is one of the early clinical signs noticed in these patients. Then he can incorporate few aspects from endocrinology. Pheochromocytoma will be having overproduction of epinephrine, norepinephrine. In fact, norepinephrine is the major overproduce in pheochromocytoma as compared to epinephrine. And then similarly, thyrotoxicosis, thyroid hormones also have an intrinsic sympathomimetic activity. So there's a lot of leverage to the examiner to ask the word tachycardia. Even if a person is having severe anemia contributes to less oxygen availability to the heart, and the heart can go into heart failure. That again explains tachycardia. So he can describe tachycardia in any of the following 5 ways. It could be short PR interval, heart failure, 2 conditions of endocrinology incorporated, and severe anemia, or for that matter of fact, any condition of heart failure like viral myocarditis or cardiomyopathy can also be written. In contrast, the second condition where you have a loud S1 is, however, physiological. Now let's look at what he means by the word physiological. Suppose a pregnant lady, you see during pregnancy anyway the cardiac output has to be increased, so the body will try to increase that cardiac output by increasing the heart rate. So when it comes to a pregnant lady and you auscultate at a loud S1, you are not going to press on the panic button because that's perfectly okay. Similarly, when it comes to children, the children also tend to have a faster heart rate as compared to adults. So we are not going to press on the panic button in this situation. The third condition where you have a loud S1, however, needs a bit of explanation, mitral stenosis. Now, because the orifice is smaller, you very well know normal size of orifice is going to be 4 to 6 square centimeter. Let's assume it's less than 1.5 square centimeter. That's severe. So because of the obstruction, the left atrial pressure will increase. Because the pressure will increase, there will be a faster opening of the valve. Keep listening. I said higher pressure gradient will contribute to faster opening of the mitral valve. And if there's going to be a faster opening, there will also be a faster elastic recoil of the valve. And this faster elastic recoil explains why there is a loud S1 in mitral stenosis. In multiple choice questions, because he wants to make it sound sophisticated, so you will also find this term written, increased transvalvular gradient. What it simply means is the pressure between the left atria and the left ventricle during diastole is increased, thereby contributing to, I would say, a louder S1 in the patient. And I also want you at this particular junction to focus on this word elastic recoil and tell me that suppose this person does not take treatment and develops a calcified severe mitral stenosis. If there is a calcification, what's going to happen to the elastic recoil? Decreases. And if the elastic recoil will decrease, it will get converted into a soft S1. So I want you to remember these words very carefully. If he says the word plain mitral stenosis, you will answer it as loud S1. But if he says calcified, because most of the time calcification occurs in severe variety, I said calcified severe mitral stenosis, your answer would be given as a soft S1. So do take care of the words which are written in the question, and same is the logic even for tricuspid stenosis in a patient, because because it's only that the side of the heart will change, but the hemodynamics will remain the same. The concept will remain the same. Enhanced transvalvular gradient will contribute to it. And if he decides to write the word calcified TS, again the same logic, soft S1 would be coming. Now, before I jot down conditions contributing to soft S1, I would just like to use this opportunity to speak regarding mitral stenosis once again. Though, mitral stenosis as a topic is covered under murmur section, but what I'm saying at the moment is that the orifice has become relatively smaller. So if you compare the two sides, what I'm trying to show is that the transit of blood from RA to RV is perfectly okay. But on the contralateral side, what I have shown is a bit of turbulence, which explains the murmur. And apart from this, you can also see the gradient developing because the obstruction is very much present. Now, because this opening is small at the moment, please don't note down and just listen to the words that I'm saying. If the opening is small, then the transit of blood from LA to LV, you see I showed a physical obstruction present here. If there's an obstruction present, this is gonna take or contribute to extra time for the blood to go from the left atria to left ventricle as compared to your and my heart. Now, first heart sound is what I've explained is M1, T1. First mitral valve closes, then tricuspid valve closes. If there's gonna be extra time required, if I focus on this word, extra time required for the blood to go, so mitral valve will close late. If mitral valve will close late, I'm gonna shift this line slightly towards the right to say the fact that the gap between M1 and T1 will become relatively lesser, and therefore the term to be incorporated here is narrow split first heart sound. If this person does not take treatment, the opening will become even more smaller. If the opening will become more smaller, the exit will take still, I am using the word extra time just to exaggerate. And if it's going to take extra time, mitral valve will close even more later to the level that both mitral and tricuspid valves might start closing at the same time. So he might say the word single S1 also. And if he still does not take treatment, no big deal that you might be having a T1 M1, that is first tricuspid valve will close, then mitral valve will close. That is opposite. It is ulta of what it ideally should be. So he can also use the word reverse splitting of the first heart sound. What I wanted you to appreciate is that in the previous slide, I have taught you regarding loud S1 and then also soft S1 for mitral stenosis, in a sense that mitral stenosis is loud, calcified mitral stenosis is soft. But now I have added to your vocabulary 3 more findings of S1 with respect to mitral stenosis. The 3 additional findings can be written as narrow split, single and reverse split. There are a total of 5 times the aspects of S1 have been explained, loud and soft for the plain one versus the calcified one, and 3 points which I've incorporated here. So the examiner has a lot of leverage in asking aspects related to S1 in a topic of mitral stenosis, and I would also recommend you to listen to mitral stenosis on the therapeutic aspects of it, even in the discussion of murmurs. Now whatever I'm gonna say is grossly opposite of what I have said on the very first slide with respect to loud S1. I'm just gonna invert the words. As I told you, tachycardia will contribute to a louder S1. The opposite aspect, bradycardia, will contribute to soft S1. Let's look at how the examiner will say the word bradycardia in a multiple choice question, because otherwise just bradycardia per se becomes too simpler. One of the terms would be, because PR interval normal is 120 to 200 milliseconds, that would be 3 to 5 small squares. So here the person will be having PR interval which is more than 5 small squares, prolonged PR interval. Now, instead of talking about prolonged PR interval, he can incorporate an endocrine condition where you have always a bradycardia, hypothyroidism. Or if he wants to keep it pure anatomy oriented, there are 3 important pacemakers in the heart: SA node, bundle of his, and AV node in the middle. And the malfunction of each of these will contribute to a slowed conduction in the heart. The disease of the SA node is called as sick sinus syndrome, though to make it sound sophisticated, he might use another term, sinus exit block. So whether you read sinus exit block or sick sinus syndrome, the bottom line is SA node is malfunctioning. If AV node will malfunction, this would be a 3rd degree heart block. In fact, heart blocks as a topic has been discussed along with bradycardia per se. I've described symptomatic bradycardia, and even in the routine discussion of ECG, heart blocks have been covered. So AV node malfunction is 3rd degree heart block, whereas a bundle of his will malfunction, then we don't call it a bundle branch block. If bundle of as well malfunction, then the technical term we will use here is Mobitz 2 heart block. The ECG aspects of it have already been discussed in a different section of the app. At the moment, I just wanted to focus on the word heart block that tells you that heart is going to work slowly and therefore there would be a soft S1. Another aspect that is to be understood is that if a person is having centripetal obesity, or let me say he's an alcoholic and he's having gynecomastia. Now, if there's going to be a lot of fat in the chest, then this fat would act like a barrier to the conduction of sound to your stethoscope, and therefore you would be having is a soft S1. Mark my words, there, I'm not speaking about muffled heart sounds. Muffled heart sounds is what you get in cardiac tamponade or in a massive pericardial effusion, because there's going to be water outside the heart, so the sounds appear distant, and that's the term muffled heart sounds. But this time I'm simply saying there's fat in the chest wall. There's no problem outside the heart. There is no fluid accumulation around the heart. It is simply fat in the chest wall, which is occluding or is reducing the intensity of the sound conducted to your stethoscope. Or for that matter of fact, emphysema. This chap is a cigarette smoker and he's having emphysema, where you have bulla formation in the lungs, where you have blebs uniting to form big bullas, and the lungs are expanded, and you read about hyperinflation. Now in emphysema, the hyperinflated lung will cover the heart. This hyperinflated lung is covering the heart, so it will again act like a barrier to the conduction of sound. Just like in obesity, I was saying that fat is gonna act like a dampener to the conduction of sound to the steth. In emphysema, the expanded lung, which is covering the heart, will act like, I would say, an insulator to the sound being conducted finally to your stethoscope. In contrast, I've already sensitized you to the situation of calcified mitral stenosis and tricuspid stenosis. I want to lay a word of caution here. It looks very simple at the moment, but a lot of people just forget to read this word and they just casually answer MS as loud S1. So since I've warned you a couple of times, you would be avoiding that mistake anyway. And the opposite of mitral stenosis is mitral regurgitation. You see, the valve will not close properly. The pressure which is being generated to close the valve will be dissipated into the atria. You see, either way to solve this question is that MS is opposite and MS and MR go other way around. So, I mean, both are fundamentally opposite diseases. MS is a loud S1, so just use English. MR will be having soft. Or as said, the gradient that is required to close the valve, that gradient would be dissipated if there's an improper closure. Therefore, MR and TR on account of improper closure result in development of a soft first heart sound in the patient. And out of all the aspects that I've highlighted here, the 5 aspects that I said for mitral stenosis, which was loud, soft, narrow, single, and reverse split / paradoxical split. As fast as I said, you should be able to register that in your brain when you're reading an MCQ related to mitral stenosis, because anyway, that's one of the commonest valvular lesions that is seen with rheumatic. So no big deal, MS and TS. Either of the two can be asked. In fact, lots of time in the exam, they love to ask about tricuspid stenosis as they did in NEET PG 2021. And I would also like you to, when you are listening to me at the moment, please make it a habit to listen to previous year papers also, because in the end you have so many things to read that you see, reading new data will look a little, I would say, awkward. So it's always a good idea to read questions along with when you are doing the main theory videos simultaneously. The advantage of doing this is that sometimes a lot of things may not be covered in the video but would be covered in the MCQ section or in the previous year questions. So you can add that information to the notes, because ultimately you need to make your notes more potent, because your best friend 1 month before your exam is going to be the notes that you have at least gone through twice and have added the information from the QBank and from the previous year papers primarily. The next description that I'm going to give you here is with respect to third heart sound and the fourth heart sound. Third heart sound, as I've highlighted even in the first video on heart sounds, is referred to as ventricular gallop rhythm, and this would be early diastolic heart sound. In contrast, fourth heart sound is atrial gallop. The main reason why you have development of third heart sound is the rapid inflow or a rapid ventricular filling. But when you will attempt MCQs on the topic, it will become a little difficult for you to comprehend that does this condition contribute to a rapid ventricular filling or a slow ventricular filling. So the unofficial way to solve the MCQ of whether a condition is gonna have a S3 or not have a S3 is based on this word dilated ventricles. If I speak a condition before you and you are able to understand that this condition will be having a dilated ventricle, this implies that when the blood will rush into this dilated ventricle during the early phase of diastole, there would be a turbulence created, and the turbulence would be perceived by the smaller side of your stethoscope as a S3. Let's focus on the right hand side now. S4 is called as atrial gallop or is also written as atrial kick. This is gonna be heard in the later part of diastole right before S1, so it is also pre-systolic heart sound. The reason why it will develop, listen to this fact carefully, is due to a outflow tract obstruction. Mark my words there, I did not say inflow tract obstruction, I said outflow tract obstruction, and because of this outflow tract obstruction the person will develop a left ventricular hypertrophy, and because of this hypertrophy there will also be compensatory left atrial hypertrophy. The left atria of this patient will pack in a punch, which I said a punch, which means extra force, and that force will generate turbulence which will be heard by your bell right before S1, so we're going to call it a fourth heart sound. Now based on this background information, I'm going to state some I would say conditions before you, and you will by logic tell me that is it going to be having S3 or is that condition going to be having a S4, and the simple logic that you need to deploy here would be dilated ventricles versus the outflow tract obstruction. Like for example, if I say, and I might deliberately write it wrong also, so you can figure it out on the basis of the logics that I've said. Suppose I say a person is having valvular aortic stenosis, then it will be a outflow tract obstruction. So there would be a concentric LVH and a left atrial hypertrophy. Instead of valvular aortic stenosis, if I say subvalvular aortic stenosis, that is hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy, just focus on the English word obstruction, or even if I don't write HOCM, I write HCM, still it's a problem with the left side, there's an outflow problem, there's an asymmetrical septal hypertrophy, so that tells you there would be S4 present. Now let me just write down a condition and you guys logically tell me, will this have a S3 or S4? And I might be deliberately writing it wrong here. I mean, I could have included it on the green side, but I've written it on the blue side. Just think logically and tell me, will hypertension have a S3 or will hypertension have a S4? You see, hypertension, if is of recent origin, if somebody will have hypertensive crisis can cause left ventricular failure, and failure will cause a dilatation of the heart. So if hypertensive crisis is mentioned, heart failure is mentioned due to hypertensive crisis, S3 can be present. But in majority of cases, hypertension is anyway gonna be a chronic condition. I mean, hypertension is so rampant in India, about 30 to 40%. In fact, some books current data state up to 45% of the entire world population can be hypertensive, including Indian population. So in every 2 people that you meet, one person is either having hypertension or will become hypertensive. The point is, if hypertension is gonna be long-standing, it's gonna be a pressure-based obstruction. Because of this, there's no physical obstruction. It's gonna be a pressure-based obstruction. So the left ventricle will have to do harder work. If it will do more work, it will hypertrophy, and then atria will also hypertrophy. And therefore, these 3 conditions that I've written before you are appropriate and correct. All of these conditions will be having a fourth heart sound. Now I'm just going to change the side. If a person is having pulmonic stenosis, like one of the conditions of pulmonic stenosis is Noonan syndrome. So again, there would be a right ventricular hypertrophy and then a right atrial hypertrophy. Similarly, if I say the word pulmonary artery hypertension, this pulmonary artery hypertension could be due to connective tissue disorders like scleroderma. I mean, the examiner may not write PAH, he might write scleroderma. Scleroderma, after all, has fibrosis in the pulmonary artery. Or pulmonary artery hypertension could be developing due to a congenital heart disease like in Eisenmenger syndrome. So the bottom line is, in pulmonary artery hypertension, because the right ventricle will have to do more work, the right atria will also have to do more work. So he is going to write the word right-sided S4 for the bottom 2 terms, PS and pulmonary artery hypertension. Whereas the superior 3 terms that I've written before you, they are related to the left side of the heart. So he can maximum write left-sided S4 in a patient. Let's now compare this with information on the left-hand side with respect to dilated heart. The best example I can give you is congestive heart failure. You see, if you just focus on the word failure, after all, the function of the heart is to contract. If the poor fellow will fail, it will dilate. Similarly, if a person is having myocarditis, it could be due to parvovirus, the commonest reason. It could be Coxsackie B, it could be COVID-19 myocarditis. The ultimate point is heart is gonna fail, get dilated, and therefore third heart sound would be felt. Similarly, in a chap with dilated cardiomyopathy, now cardiomyopathy of the dilated variety can be due to ischemia, it could be due to congenital reasons. So he can definitely, I mean, the examiner has a lot of scope to incorporate causes of dilated cardiomyopathy, but the bottom line is dilated ventricles, a rush of blood contributes to turbulence. To throw you off the track, the examiner may also try to incorporate some respiratory terms Like you very well know, cor pulmonale means that the person is having right ventricular failure due to non-cardiogenic causes. Cor pulmonale can be of two varieties, the acute variety and obviously the chronic variety. So in fact, I can put that as a question to you guys, because if I write it, obviously you may just skip that information. Can you tell me the most common cause for cor pulmonale, guys? Cor pulmonale, the chronic variety, acute variety later on. First, can you tell me the number one cause for cor pulmonale? One of the important reasons for cor pulmonale is right ventricular failure due to pulmonary artery hypertension due to long-standing hypoxia caused by COPD. So he may deliberately introduce a respiratory term just to see that you know that COPD complication is cor pulmonale, right ventricle will dilate and there will be a development of third heart sound. Similarly, he can also incorporate another term where you will be having acute cor pulmonale. This acute cor pulmonale is what I have discussed in respiratory system. There's a separate video on pulmonary embolism, very important for the exam, so please go through that. Pulmonary embolism as a term implies acute onset. COPD is chronic, long-standing, this is going to be acute onset, but ultimately right ventricle is still failing. So anytime, whether he wants to incorporate cardiogenic causes, non-cardiogenic causes, the meaning of the word cor pulmonale per se, as you very well know, is right ventricular failure due to non-cardiogenic causes. Any of these information given and you will be able to solve the questions, and just make a table and compare the data that are written in the lower part of this table, the green versus the blue one, and you would be able to figure out S3 versus S4. One more information that I can add here just to make you feel more comfortable is, like suppose in the earlier part of the animations per se, you will see an animation of mitral valve prolapse, and I've explained MVP can cause MR. So if a person is having a chronic MR of the severe variety, then there is an incompetent valve. If there's an incompetent valve, what will happen is that the LV blood will leak back to LA. Normally in you and me, not a single drop of blood is ever gonna go from the LV to LA, but this blood of LV is leaking to LA, and then this blood has nowhere else to go, so it will come back also to LV, no? So what you have is a volume overloading of the left side of the heart, and when I say the word volume overloading means distension, and distension would contribute to a third heart sound developing. So in chronic severe MR, there's a left ventricular failure, there's a left ventricular distension, which explains why third heart sound is present. So this I would rate as one of the important slides for this particular part of the discussion, because S1 is relatively less commonly asked. Either they will ask you about S2 because they love to ask about the splitting component, and it's anyway important to study about the splitting component because it will help you solve those long stem questions. Every time you read the word narrow split second heart sound, left ventricle failure. If you read the word wide split second heart sound, it means right ventricular failure. So lots of time in the exam, you don't need to go through the entire stem. The moment you read the word narrow split second heart sound, you know it's a left ventricular failure in a patient. So things become relatively easier because once you know the side, you need to localize the lesion to any of the valves, or it could be maybe a outflow tract obstruction. There could be a subvalvular lesion, which can be figured out later. But first is to find which side of the heart is involved. Now, once we get this information correct, then another question that I have found being asked is that fourth heart sound is going to be absent in. Traditionally, we are always so interested in knowing that a particular condition will be having a S3 or S4 that we tend to forget this information. So I'm highlighting this with a separate color. Fourth heart sound is going to be absent in a condition where atria will not be able to do their routine function. Forget about generating a kick. Forget about generating a gallop. Forget about generating extra power. I am describing a condition in which fourth heart sound can never ever be seen because the poor atria are twitching. The commonest arrhythmia in clinical practice, the commonest sustained arrhythmia in clinical practice is atrial fibrillation because the atria is going to be twitching. There's no forceful contraction. Forget about forceful. There's not even a normal contraction happening. So it's going to be twitching, contributing to, the twitching cannot generate power. So it's going to be an absent fourth heart sound in a patient. In fact, this also gives me leverage to mention that in atrial fibrillation, the dominance of the heart, normally we talk about that SA node is the dominant pacemaker, but in atrial fibrillation, it is the ectopic foci which are the dominant pacemaker. SA node per se is not going to be a dominant pacemaker. As the result of it, even in atrial fibrillation, the first wave of the ECG will be absent, P wave will be absent. Similarly, the first wave of the JVP is the A wave. A wave is due to atrial systole, though I'll be drawing diagrams of JVP also before you, but all of you know from physiology that A wave is due to atrial systole, and in atrial fibrillation there is no atrial systole because atria are twitching. So even the first wave of the JVP will be absent. So you can see that three things are absent in atrial fibrillation. You can remember it like this: the commonest arrhythmia in clinical practice, you do not get the first wave of the ECG, you do not get the first wave of the JVP, and you can never ever have a fourth heart sound in these patients. This is usually mentioned in all the textbooks towards the end of the table, so I thought I'll just highlight this component here, and once you work out the logic, you will be able to solve questions of all our causes of S3 except, all our causes of S4 except, and anyway something very simple can be all our causes of, this is going to be a piece of cake for you, left-sided S4 versus right-sided S4. You can just solve it on the basis of English only. In the next part of the discussion, I'm going to describe to you regarding the various waves of the JVP. You see, we can be checking the jugular venous pressure in the internal jugular vein. We can check it in the external jugular vein also, but on a comparison basis, if he talks about selecting one, then your answer would be internal jugular vein. The normal value of this would be 5 to 8 centimeters of water, and you're gonna calculate this with the help of a scale. The level will be calculated with respect to the angle of Louis. That would be the manubrio-sternal angle, and if the values are more than this, then you will say that the person is having an elevated JVP. It always indicates the status of the right side of the heart. Whenever there's a right-sided heart failure, the jugular venous pressure will always be increased. If you take a deep breath, like if I request a patient, or if I ask you and I'm checking out your JVP in your internal jugular vein, then if I ask you to take a deep breath, the pressure in the chest will turn negative. Deep inspiration, it's like a negative vacuum force. So in a normal person, the JVP always falls on inspiration. I want to reiterate this fact once again. You can be checking JVP in either of the two, internal as well as external jugular vein, but it is internal jugular vein that is recommended. Then I said JVP always falls on deep inspiration, but now I'm going to describe a pathological condition. This person has taken ATT for tubercular pericarditis. After taking treatment for tubercular pericarditis, the calcification around the heart will result in constrictive pericarditis to manifest. In this chap with constrictive pericarditis, when you are going to ask this guy to take a deep breath, the body will try to generate negative pressure. Obviously, deep inspiration will generate negative pressure, so the body will try to send blood into the heart. But the problem here is that this chap is having a non-compliant ventricle. There is a thick zone of calcification around the heart, so the compliance is substantially reduced. So the blood will not be able to go because the heart is surrounded by a thick zone of calcification. So the heart will not be able to distend and receive this blood, and therefore there can be two possibilities. Either the JVP will not fall, or there's also a possibility that the JVP of this person might even rise. If the JVP rises on deep inspiration, in you and me, it will always fall, but whenever JVP rises on deep inspiration, it always implies that this is grossly abnormal and is technically called as Kussmaul sign. We always read about Kussmaul breathing in diabetic ketoacidosis, but Kussmaul sign is what you always see with patients who are suffering from the following diseases, and the mnemonic can be remembered as CRR. Alphabet C here would stand for constrictive pericarditis. I'll just use a short form now, CP. Then R would stand for restrictive cardiomyopathy. The difference between the two conditions is that in constrictive pericarditis, the stiffness of the heart is because of calcification outside the heart. In restrictive cardiomyopathy, there is no stiffness outside the heart, but there's going to be fibrosis in the cardiac muscle, which could be due to reasons like amyloidosis or endomyocardial fibroelastosis. I have described the causes of restrictive cardiomyopathy in the cardiomyopathy section. So be wary of the fact that he may not write restrictive cardiomyopathy, but might be writing causes of it. So go through the causes of restrictive cardiomyopathy in the cardiomyopathy section, and then would be alphabet R coming up for right-sided congestive heart failure. Every time the right side of the heart will fail, when I say fail, the poor fellow does not have space because there is congestion. Already there is congestion. If you try to send blood into the heart, there is no space available, so the column will remain elevated, or it instead of falling normally, it will tend to rise. So that's perfectly abnormal. And conditions which contribute to right-sided heart failure, the vocabulary of the examiner can be inferior MI where right coronary artery is infarcted, or it could be COPD, which can contribute to pulmonary artery hypertension. Remember I said cor pulmonale, or he might write pulmonary embolism, which will cause acute cor pulmonale and contribute to right ventricular failure. So any of the terms which are mentioned here, if you just focus on the CRR mnemonic, your job would be done. As compared to the carotid pulsation, I mean, when you compare, because in the neck, when you are examining the patient, it's no big deal that you could be confusing the carotid pulsation with the jugular pulsation also. The best way is that carotid pulsation, you cannot obliterate with pressure. But jugular pulsations can be obliterated with pressure if you apply pressure at the base of the neck, just, or I would say right in the suprasternal area, then right at where the sternocleidomastoid muscle is originating, then you can obliterate the pulsations of JVP, but carotid pulsations cannot be obliterated. Another feature that will always help you will be the frequency. You see, the jugular venous frequency, if I just highlight, the frequency will be always 2 times the carotid frequency. Why I'm saying that is because in the JVP, we will be having positive wave and negative waves. Positive waves are ACV, negative waves are X and Y. You guys tell me, right, since you have studied physiology, in a normal person, when you see the JVP, you can see the JVP column falling on a normal, on deep inspiration in a person. So my question to you guys is, in a normal person, though I've given you a hint already, in a normal person, when you check out the JVP, do you see the positive waves or do you see the negative waves? Yes guys, I'm gonna give you a 10-second breather here. In a normal person, when you're checking out the JVP, because C wave is very small, so obviously can't be seen. So either you're left with answer as AV, or you're gonna be left with answer as XY. My question is, when you're gonna check out the JVP of a normal person, do you see positive waves or do you see negative waves? Well, A and V are positive waves, but they are related to atria, and atria generate less pressure, whereas X and Y are related definitely to ventricles. It is the X and the Y descent which is seen in a normal person. Yes guys, the normal JVP pulsations that you see is 2 times the carotid frequency, and what you see is not the rise. What you see is not the rise, it is the fall that you are seeing in a normal individual. And if you are having, rather I can highlight this again, an MCQ statement coming up, non-pulsatile elevated JVP. In all cardiology conditions, you always have a pulsatile elevated JVP. But if I say non-pulsatile elevated JVP in a patient, that means that there can be 2 problems. One problem can be that superior vena cava of the patient has been affected. This could be superior vena cava thrombosis. Why? Because maybe you put in a pacemaker wire through the SVC and it has caused a thrombosis of the SVC. Or let me say, person is having a lung cancer, like a oat cell cancer, which is causing superior vena cava syndrome. The second condition where you would be reading regarding non-pulsatile elevated JVP is cardiac tamponade. The description for cardiac tamponade will be given on the subsequent slide, because here it will make it very untidy, already lots of data. But this is one of the very important statements, because in all conditions in cardiology, you are always gonna read regarding elevated pulsatile JVP. The only situation where you're gonna read 2 times, in fact in whole of cardiology, when you're gonna read non-pulsatile elevated JVP is superior vena cava thrombosis and a situation of cardiac tamponade. And now I'm going to draw some line diagrams before you, where I'll be explaining how the waves of the JVP would be developing. Now with respect to the waves of the JVP, I'm going to first draw the diagram of atrial systole before you. This diagram will be identical to what I've drawn in Heart Sounds Part 1, but there would be slight differences also. At the moment, it will look identical, like I have shown 30% filling of the ventricles is primarily because of the atrial systole. But what I will do next in this diagram would be a slight modification, in a sense that this can be taken as representation of the jugular vein. Now obviously the internal and the external jugular veins are communicating with the right side of the heart, but they're not directly attached to the right atria. So this is only a symbolic representation that the jugular venous system, primarily internal jugular vein, is related to the right atrium. Because of the positive pressure which is gonna be generated here, there is gonna be an upward deflection which would be referred to as the A wave. However, after a few milliseconds, the situation will change. So let's look at in the second diagram what the change would be occurring. Now is the turn of the ventricles to contract. So the tricuspid valve and mitral valve have closed, but what I've also shown is a slight bulge. This bulge is because the ventricles are now beginning to contract. But at the moment, the pressure is not sufficient to open either the aortic or the pulmonic valves. The aortic and pulmonic valves are still closed. So I had represented before you in Heart Sounds 1 that we have is a isovolumetric contraction where no blood comes in the heart, no blood goes out of the heart, but you can still very much see that the valve is bulging upward. This slight bulge of the valve in upward direction is what I am highlighting at the moment. This will be responsible for a very small positive deflection, but anyway, it's gonna be worth the MCQ that this small positive deflection due to the bulge of the valve upwards is responsible for the C wave. The theory to be remembered is C wave is seen in IVC. Just remember C and C alphabets, and it's going to be the bulge of the valve which is going to be responsible. Let's now compare what's going to happen subsequently. And in the subsequent diagram, I'm going to slightly exaggerate the bulge so that I can get the findings relatively better. This is the bulge of the valves. This is the initial position. And now I have drawn a bigger plus sign to say that the pressure in the ventricles will increase much more than what is present few milliseconds later, which will be responsible for the aortic and the pulmonic valves to open. So the pressure will be dissipated and therefore blood will rush into the pulmonary artery, blood will rush into the aorta, and you guys just look at this diagram and tell me if the pressure is going to be dissipated well, like this, the way I have shown, what's going to happen to the tricuspid and the mitral valve? Will they continue to go upwards or will they fall back to their normal position? You can very well understand that the way I have drawn the diagram, when the pressure of the ventricles is getting dissipated, what's going to happen is that both of these valves will come back to their normal position. And because the vector in this particular case is pointing in a downward direction, so what I'll be mentioning here will be that the wave that we are seeing here is a X descent. This X descent is seen during the stage of ventricular systole, or for that matter of fact, just to draw parallels with the physiology, at the moment when ventricles are contracting, atria are resting. Right? When atria are working, ventricles are resting. When ventricles are working, then atria are resting. So either in multiple choice question, he can write this information that X is related to ventricular systole, or he can just write simple plain forward physiological explanation that the X descent is primarily because of atrial relaxation. But you will notice when I'll draw this X descent with respect to the cardiac cycle, it will be represented during this phase ejection, that is ventricular systole. Now let us compare this diagram with the subsequent one. So I want you to look at the next event which will happen in this patient. I have shown that the tricuspid valve has come back to its normal position. Mitral valve has come back to its normal position. Also, I have shown that the aortic and the pulmonic valves have now closed. So this was responsible for second heart sound. But now the venous filling of the same atria will occur. So this is the venous return. This venous return will generate pressure, or I can explain another way. The blood will come in, hit the valve is closed now, so the blood will literally bounce off this area. So I have tried to say two things. One, that if you fill blood into a chamber, when I'm filling blood, the pressure will increase, and after all the valve is closed, tricuspid as well as mitral, so there's gonna be a positive pressure generated, and this positive pressure generation will again be affecting the jugular venous column. So I am at the moment showing a positive deflection in this case. This positive deflection that I have now made before you will be called as the V wave. The reason for this V wave, as you can see, is the venous filling of the atria. Either you can remember from the V alphabet itself, like I was saying, C is related to IVC. The V wave that is occurring is primarily because of the venous filling of the atria, and the blood cannot go in forward direction down into the ventricles because at the moment the tricuspid valve as well as the mitral valve is closed, and this event again is right at the end of systole. When the ventricular, see, when does S2 occur? S2 occurs right at the end of systole. So the moment the S2 will occur, that's when the blood will be filled into the atria of the patient. So the V wave will be peaking at the level of S2. When I'll draw the JVP and the heart sound, you will notice V wave will be peaking at S2 or just around the S2, primarily because the moment these valves will close, the filling will also start occurring. So both events would usually occur at the same time. And now, because we discussed a positive wave, now is the time for a negative wave. Let us see why that happens. In the last diagram, I'm showing that there's an opening snap occurring. If you look at this diagram, I've just put a star mark to say that now there will be a negative deflection after the V wave. Why? Because now the pressure will be dissipated once again, because ultimately the tricuspid and the mitral valve will open and the blood will start reaching up to the ventricles of the patient. You can see that the vector in this particular case will be pointing in a downward direction. So why descent per se? is related to the early part of diastole, or I can say this is related to rapid ventricular filling or early part of the diastole primarily, because I have described diastole with respect to protodiastole, then isovolumetric relaxation, subsequently a rapid ventricular filling that would be occurring. So Y descent would be mainly related to this area where you would be having a isovolumetric relaxation and a rapid ventricular filling occurring in a patient. In fact, if I have both in the options, then I would say that first I will write isovolumetric relaxation, and then as isovolumetric relaxation will end, then subsequently rapid ventricular filling will be followed by again a development of a wave. So this is the sequence of events that you need to remember, and let's just put the theory here, because after all in lots of questions they may not be having any images, but they'll be just incorporating the theory component. A wave is very simple. It is atrial systole. Nobody ever makes a mistake with respect to the A wave. Nobody makes a mistake with respect to the C wave. It is IVC. It is the bulge of the valve in upward direction. We are going to talk about the V wave here. The V wave that I drew before you was characterized by venous return once again into the atria. But this venous return that was occurring was obviously filling up the atria of the patient, but the blood was not being given permission to go into the ventricles because the tricuspid and the mitral valves were closed. So the V wave, we usually find that it peaks at the level of the S2, whereas when it comes to the X descent, I drew the X descent before you for ventricular systole, but just drawing parallels with physiology, this is gonna be atrial relaxation. Let me just go back to the previous diagram so that you can relate to the changes that I'm describing for X versus V, because X is negative and V is positive. So let's look at Y. If you look at the two diagrams which are currently on the focus, I'll just zoom it in. These particular two diagrams that you focus on, you can very well see that in one of them, there's going to be a relaxation of the atria, because nothing much is happening in the atria per se. It is rather going to be the ventricles which are dissipating the pressure. Ventricles are working. And then you are having filling of blood. So that's why I said positive pressure being generated, and the V wave is anyway a positive wave. So if you can just get this theory right, things will definitely fall into place. And when it comes to Y, I said it is a relaxation. The early part of the relaxation would be protodiastole and isovolumetric relaxation. Subsequently would be a rapid ventricular filling. So you will notice a Y curving downwards towards the IVR and going towards early part of I would say the diastole. This is the theory related to these waves. The ECG, some parameters will definitely be slightly exaggerated, and I would suggest you to hand draw this with me so that you can get a better orientation of the linkage of the ECG, JVP and the heart sounds. First and foremost would be the atrial systole. See guys, I want you to remember that the electrical activity and the mechanical activity are two separate aspects. If he asks you in the exam what is PR interval, it's gonna be spread of current from the SA node to the AV node. But that does not mean atrial systole. Atrial systole, if he will ask you specifically, your answer will not be the PR interval. PR interval is from starting of P to the starting of Q, no? Name is PR interval, but it is not till the R interval. It's not till the R wave per se. So what I've shown before you at the moment is not PR. What I've shown before you is atrial systole. Now from the peak of the R wave to right till the end of the T wave, this particular area is what is ventricular systole. When I say ventricular systole, do not answer it as starting from the Q wave. Q wave is when there's a septal activation. Then the current goes into left fascicle, right fascicle, then via the Purkinje fiber, and then to the cardiac muscle. So ventricular systole is mechanical activity. And Q wave, QRS that I described with respect to ECG is electrical activity. You need to understand mechanical activity and electrical activity are two separate issues. The electrical activity with respect to QRS implies, Q implies septal activation, but the ventricular contraction starts from the peak of the R and ends at the T. Again, your query would be the Dr. T wave implies ventricular repolarization. So how it could be end of the T? I repeat once again, electrical activity and mechanical activity are two separate aspects. Right at the end of the T onwards, there would be a ventricular diastole. So one, I have divided the ECG artificially into three segments. And in each of these three segments that I've drawn before you, I want to highlight the mechanical component. And now what's going to happen is I'm going to incorporate the JVP findings. So the first one is pretty straightforward. We are going to be having the A wave, which is going to correspond to atrial systole. Then there's going to be a slight bulge, that's going to be C. and then there's going to be negative descent, that is X. And you can see while I'm drawing it at the moment, I've drawn X exactly at the area of ventricular systole. Let me go back to my slide. I had told you the fact that X is related to atrial relaxation, but you can see it was drawn during the phase of ejection when the blood is going out of the heart. This is when this particular diagram that I'm marking is ventricular systole, no? So I have drawn X exactly at where I had highlighted it earlier, and after this there would again be a positive wave because the atria will start starting to get filled with blood, and you would be having a positive deflection which would be in the form of a V wave. This V wave will usually peak at the level of S2, and then subsequently the pressure will begin to fall, and you would be having is a Y descent that will extend from protodiastole into isovolumetric relaxation. From this diagram, what you also have to understand is, and I'm using a different color to highlight the heart sounds here. This that I've drawn initially is the first heart sound. So S1 occurs right at the end of atrial systole. It's bang at the end of the atrial systole. Then you can see C to X transition is occurring. C is a positive wave, X is a negative wave. So that C to X transition is occurring with respect to the ejection click. I'll just go back in the slide and show you the diagram of the C versus the X. If you compare the two diagrams, what is the difference between the two diagrams? The main difference between the two diagrams is that the aortic and pulmonic valves are closed, and now the aortic and pulmonic valves are opened. This single event is causing a positive wave to get converted into negative. C was a positive wave, but the moment the pressure gets dissipated, valves will come back to normal position. So the positive is getting converted into a negative wave, that is X descent. So the transition is what he has also asked, that would be with respect to the ejection click. Similarly, right at the end of the ventricular systole, would be the second heart sound, S2, that would be occurring in the patient, and this would be followed by opening snap. So you can see that the transition that is occurring from V to Y will occur something just adjacent to or just before the opening snap. And in fact, if he just says peak of V, then your answer would be the second heart sound, right before the second heart sound, the way I've drawn. Ventricular systole will end and the V wave will be peaking because that's where the blood is coming into the atria primarily. It is atrial filling that was occurring, and the Y would be related to a ventricular relaxation. And in fact, what I can also do is I can put up fourth heart sound here. So the fourth heart sound would be related to which wave of the JVP? Your answer would be the A wave. I would request you, though this diagram is given in physiology, also to hand draw this at least once. Just divide the ECG into three components. In the first component, you will be able to see the A wave, you will be able to notice the fourth heart sound, and the waves in the ECG would be P wave and the Q wave and the upswing of the R. Subsequently, you would be having three waves of the JVP, C, X and the V that would be peaking, and this would be related to two heart sounds, S1 ejection click. If he says isovolumetric contraction, in fact a bit of physiology here again, if he specially talks about IVC, this part that I marked before you, this is called as isovolumetric contraction. So the question might also say which heart sound is right in the starting of isovolumetric contraction. You can look from the diagram, starting of IVC is going to be S1. And he says end of isovolumetric contraction, that's going to be the ejection click, because the situation will change. C wave positive will get converted into negative. So this particular line diagram where they have, I would say, mentioned regarding the electrical activity, the JVP and the heart sounds together is something which I would request you to remember. And if you hand draw this within 1.5 minutes, that means that you have understood this basic cardiac activity relatively better. Subsequently, I'll be describing a couple of abnormalities related to the JVP also before you. So the first on the agenda would be to talk about a large A wave. Let me just draw this diagram of the A wave before you once again. In fact, this is the third time in this entire series that I'm describing atrial systole. But what I'm doing at the moment is I'm showing a narrowing, I'm showing a tricuspid stenosis. So in every person who's having tricuspid stenosis, the right atria will have to generate more force to push blood in a forward direction, and this more force will result in the column of blood going up much higher. So the message is that you will be having large A wave in a person of tricuspid stenosis. Similarly, if a person is having pulmonic stenosis, you see, after all, the right side of the heart has to pump blood into the pulmonary circuit. So if this opening is small, again the right atria will also have to contribute. After all, sending blood into the lungs is not only the responsibility of the right ventricle but also a responsibility of the right atria. So if the right atria has to work harder, the column would go definitely higher as compared to normal. So obstructive lesions of the right side of the heart result in a large AVIP. Let us see, would you be getting this with mitral stenosis or not? You see, in mitral stenosis, the problem is with respect to the left side of the heart. So let's look at the information here primarily from the perspective of mitral stenosis of long standing duration. If I narrow this orifice, the pressure will start rising in the left atria. This is going to contribute to a left atrial distension, and then there would be a pulmonary venous hypertension. Because of this pulmonary venous hypertension, there would be back pressure changes that will contribute to pulmonary edema. Pulmonary edema of long-standing duration will cause hypoxia, and hypoxia is the trigger that can cause constriction of the pulmonary artery and can contribute to pulmonary artery hypertension. Now, if you just focus on the word pulmonary artery hypertension, right side of the heart will have to do more work to push blood in a forward direction because the pressure of the pulmonary artery is high, and therefore this column will still go much higher. So the message is mitral stenosis of recent duration will definitely not cause it. But if mitral stenosis causes problems in the right side of the heart, you very well know it, mitral stenosis, it is right ventricular chamber that will be hypertrophying, and if the right ventricle is hypertrophied, I can say right ventricular end diastolic pressure will be more. If the pressure in the right ventricle will be more, then the right atria will anyway have to generate more force to push blood into this hypertrophied, because end diastolic pressure is more, the chamber will have to work harder to push blood into this hypertrophied chamber, and therefore this again gives justification to why I said mitral stenosis or long-standing duration will contribute to a large AVIP. This also gives a lot of scope to the examiner to incorporate causes of pulmonary artery hypertension. I'll just mention the famous ones, the ones that have been asked, that is like a connective tissue disorder by the name of scleroderma. Then is due to drugs. Now these drugs are banned now. They were weight losing drugs. They were very much in vogue and were used in Hollywood and even in Bollywood by celebrities to lose weight, but they have been banned because they cause pulmonary artery hypertension. So fenfluramines, if you read the list of pulmonary artery hypertension, in the drugs causing pulmonary artery hypertension, you will always read the name fenfluramine, which has been asked. And then I can also incorporate pediatric aspect, Eisenmenger. I mean, the person was initially having a left to right sided shunt. Now it's a shunt reversal. Why? Because there's a pulmonary artery hypertension. So any of these terms could be mentioned. The fifth cause I'm going to mention here is from hardcore pediatrics. You very well know that in tetralogy of Fallot, one of the predominant determinants of cyanosis is subpulmonic stenosis. In tetralogy of Fallot, we do not have a pulmonic, but we have a subpulmonic stenosis, but the logic is still the same. If there's a subpulmonic stenosis, the right ventricle will have to work harder, right atria will also have to work harder to push blood into the lungs, and therefore this would contribute to large A waves in a patient. In a multiple choice question, do take care of the fact that if long standing word is not given, then don't answer as mitral stenosis for large A wave. I mean, the impression is mitral stenosis. I agree, mitral stenosis large A wave, but only of long standing duration, no. And this concept was asked in this time's NEET exam when they simply asked a question on large A wave, and tricuspid and mitral stenosis both was in the options, and lots of guys casually answered mitral stenosis, whereas the answer was tricuspid stenosis. Primarily why? Because not that mitral stenosis is more common. The aspect is that JVP deals with the right side of the heart. So if I get a large wave in a person in a tracing, I will first think problem is in the right side of the heart. Only on long-standing mitral stenosis, if the phrase long-standing is not given, which was not given in NEET 2021, that's why I have marked tricuspid stenosis in the previous year paper. And anyway, I would suggest you to keep on doing previous year papers also simultaneously so that you get an idea of whatever topics that are being asked. The next aspect to be remembered for A wave will be in which condition would you be having absent A waves. Now, though I've already sensitized you to it, but it's my job to highlight the fact once again. If the atria are twitching, they will not be able to generate power, because ultimately it was the atrial force which was generating A wave. If the power is not generated, then the first wave of the JVP will be absent, and the first wave of ECG is also absent in these patients. Now he will change the language into super large. He will change it into super large A waves. Instead of saying super large, he will say giant A waves, or an alternative description that might be given would be Cannon A waves. Now, every time you read this information, giant or Cannon A waves, they basically mean the same, and don't mix them up with large, because I said large and super large. When I talk about super large, it's gonna be primarily because of lack of coordination between the atria and the ventricles. What happens is first atria contract, then ventricle contract. Imagine both contracting together. I said a big thing. I said first atria contract, 30% filling of the ventricle, then ventricle contracts. I am saying if both will contract together, then the power of both the atria as well as the ventricle will be amplified and will cause a super large AV. Now, what are the conditions that contribute to AV dissociation? A couple of names to be remembered. You will notice that in the subsequent videos, I'll be describing a tachyarrhythmia where there will be a AV dissociation present, ventricular tachycardia. Then is JT, junctional tachycardia. In fact, the highlight of junctional tachycardia is that AV node becomes the boss of the heart, and this results in development of negative P waves. I mean, normally I have always described P waves to be positive, but in the ECG you will be getting negative P waves in majority of leads. I mean, normally in all the leads it is P wave is positive, here it will be negative. Retrograde P waves are found in junctional tachycardia. What will happen is AV node will become the boss of the heart. So it will send one impulse to the atria and another impulse to the ventricle, and both will contract together. See, in you and me, SA node makes the atria contract first, then impulse goes down to the ventricle. So first atria, then ventricle contracts. Here, it is the AV node which is becoming the boss. First, that is abnormal. And then it is sending two impulses, one to the top, one to the bottom, and both chambers of the heart are contracting together. So the power of both of them is added, and that causes a super large AV. Then there's a bradyarrhythmia that I've discussed subsequently called as third degree heart block. Third degree heart block is a disease of the bundle of phase. In fact, it is also written in multiple choice questions as complete heart block. So you will notice that the examiner will now be having a lot of leverage to use around these terms, because third degree heart block, complete heart block, and there's even a third name for it that I've not written to reduce the load on your brain at the movement, Stokes-Adams syndrome. But when you will read about bradyarrhythmias, when you will read about symptomatic bradycardia in the lower part of the app in cardiology, you will see me using even the term Stokes-Adams also. But giant A waves, Cannon A waves, or super large A waves that are seen with two tachy and one bradyarrhythmia. What are the names for tachy arrhythmia? JT and VT. And what are the names for the bradyarrhythmia? It's a disease of the bundle of phase. That's going to be a complete heart block. The subsequent MCQ that I'm going to describe before you for the JVP would be called as absent X descent. So for this, I'll be drawing the diagram of X once again. Please follow the vectors carefully. At the moment, I'm showing normal. All I'm showing at the moment is that the valves are bulging upwards and the ventricles are in a state of contraction. The plus here implies that the ventricular pressure has now resulted in opening of the aortic and the pulmonic, and the blood is racing into the aorta and the pulmonary artery. This is going to cause the valves to come back to their normal position. So the vector that I drew before you was in negative direction. This is perfectly normal at the moment, no issues. Now what I'm showing in this diagram is tricuspid regurgitation. There's an incompetent tricuspid valve which is contributing for the blood to leak from the right ventricle to the right atria. You can see two vectors at the moment. One is in dotted blue, the second one is in green. And if the two vectors will strike each other, they can cancel also. So absent X descent would be found in a patient where there's a leakage of blood. The positive vector that is shown in green will cancel the negative vector which is shown in dotted blue, and tricuspid regurgitation results in absent X. Just to stretch your imagination a little more, I'll just exaggerate this finding. Suppose my patient is having severe tricuspid regurgitation. So what I've done in this diagram is just that I have made the green vector, the positive vector, stronger. If this vector is going to be stronger than the blue vector, then the whole thing will go upwards. And when the whole thing goes upwards, it would be responsible for what is called as a CV wave. I'm calling it a CV wave because after C there should be X, but there is no X. And the vector will push the component upwards. That would contribute to a very characteristic term that people tend to misread as a giant C wave. Guys, I'm not teaching you any giant C wave. I'm teaching you a CV wave. Let's look at what am I talking about. This is the normal JVP tracing. This is A, then is gonna be C, then is gonna be the X, V and the Y. This is what is normally present. Now I'm going to use a different color to represent for severe variety of tricuspid regurgitation. In this chap, the A wave will be same. C will obviously be the same, but there's going to be no X. No X because there's going to be no negative deflection. Everything is going to go up. So the JVP column is going to pick up from here only. It's gonna, the tracing in a person of severe tricuspid regurgitation will look like the way I have drawn, and this particular area where I put the single green mark or a star mark is called as a CV wave. So I said a lot of people might misread it as a giant C wave. It's a CV wave. It's no typographical error. Second, you will also notice that where I put the tick mark here, this would be referred to as a steep. Why steep? Because this looks like a descent of a roller coaster ride. All of you as kids might have gone to any amusement park where there are roller coaster rides. So the roller coaster ride then suddenly falls. So this is gonna be a sudden fall. So this is called as a steep Y descent. And therefore, with help of one line diagram, I have taught you answer to 3 MCQs. Tricuspid regurgitation, which has been shown in this diagram, will be answer to 3 MCQs. Absent X, CV wave, and then a steep Y descent in a patient. Obviously, the information that is mentioned on the right, the CV wave and the steep Y descent, is related to the severe variety of tricuspid regurgitation. If severe word is not given, then your simple answer would be given as absent X descent. Once you get a hang of this, I'm going to next teach you another MCQ, which is going to be related to absent Y descent. So let's have a look at how this will happen. I have taught you Y descent was related to the filling of the blood in the heart. It was related to the initial part of the relaxation. And I also highlighted that once the blood will get filled in the heart, there would be an opening snap that would be occurring. So this will definitely extend towards even rapid ventricular filling. So the message is, I am saying at the moment, absent Y descent would be seen in a condition where you cannot have ventricular filling. Now, how is it possible that ventricular filling will not occur? I mean, it's after all a live patient. So let's look at when ventricular filling would be hampered. I am describing a person who's driving a car without a seat belt. And the car met with an accident, and unfortunately this guy, because he was not using the seat belt, his chest slammed into the steering wheel, and this resulted in hemoperitoneum in this patient. What is happening in this chap? You can take this to be the representation of the pericardial sac. This pericardial sac is now having blood which is present here, and this blood will start crushing the heart from outside. So symbolically, I'm showing a patient who's having a cardiac tamponade. The diagram here shows that there's going to be hemopericardium, or let's take another easier method of remembering it. A patient who's having a malignant lung cancer like oat cell cancer, that can contribute to a malignant pericardial effusion, which has now become so big that this is going to exert pressure on the heart from outside. I can call this casually as the third space of the heart. The pericardial space, I'm calling it as third space of the heart, and the third space of the heart is putting pressure on the heart from outside. Because of this, the filling of blood in both the right side as well as the left, I mean the way I've shown the diagram, I'm saying blood will not be able to fill. Even if the valves will open, the amount of filling that will be occurring in this person will be relatively lesser. Let me just make the diagram much more, I would say, oriented here. I said because of the increase in the amount of pressure in the third space, which is the pericardial space, the filling of blood into the ventricular chambers would be hampered. The condition that I'm describing before you is casually written as obstructive shock. Now, every time you read this word, you have to always understand that he's talking about cardiac tamponade. There can be two scenarios with which this can be given, either with respect to a malignant pericardial effusion ultimately causing a tamponade, or for that matter of fact, I can say that even like a seat belt not being used. I'm not talking about seat belt syndrome at the moment. All I'm saying is the guy is not using a seat belt, just slams into the steering wheel. So hemopericardium can cause crushing of the heart, and therefore problems will occur. The problems would be that the filling will be lesser. If input in the heart is less, output will also be lesser. The cardiac output of this patient will decrease, the BP of this patient will decrease, and giving IV fluids in this person would rather worsen the status of the patient, because you are overloading the heart. The poor heart cannot function because the pericardial space pressure is elevated. The treatment for this chap is echocardiographic guided pericardiocentesis. If you relieve the pressure from what I casually said, the third space, which is the pericardial space, only then this person will be able to survive. If you do not do it, the blood pressure of this patient will begin to crash, and the pulse of this patient will begin to gradually disappear. Normally, pulse disappears when there's a cardiac arrest. But in this patient, the pulse will begin to disappear, and mainly the disappearance will be noticed during inspiration. Earlier, I was telling you that JVP rises during inspiration. That is abnormal. That's going to be a description for small sign. Now I'm teaching you one more finding with respect to deep inspiration, which is pulse of the patient is disappearing. See guys, at the moment, I'm not saying that the person is in cardiac arrest. I am teaching you a condition where the heart is beating and still the pulse is disappearing in the phase of inspiration. I'll also give you reason why it is in the phase of inspiration, but at the moment I have said a very characteristic term, pulse disappearing in inspiration with a person who's having obstructive shock is technically called as pulsus paradoxus. The message is, what is the paradox? The paradox is the heart is beating, but still the pulse is disappearing, and is disappearing in which phase of respiration? Your answer would be it is disappearing in the phase of inspiration per se. At this juncture, I want to make it clear before you, if they ask you that when you evaluate pulsus paradoxus, what will you instruct the patient? Deep inspiration, deep expiration, hold your breath, or normal breathing? You will not ask your patient to take a deep breath, because if you ask him to take a deep breath, the pressure will fall and it can cause even syncope, it can even cause cerebral ischemia, it can cause coronary ischemia. So normal breathing is recommended. I'll jot down the point subsequently, but the learning at this particular point of time is that in any person where the heart is not able to get filled with blood, anytime if the heart is not able to get filled with blood, the ventricular filling of the heart is impacted, then the negative Y descent will anyway be absent, and therefore the MCQ statement, because we are primarily at the moment focusing on JVP at the moment, the statement is, I taught you absent X descent is tricuspid regurgitation, absent Y descent is what I have just highlighted before you, cardiac tamponade. Now, before we go forwards, I also want to say the fact that initially the pressure might be such that only atria will be compromised. You see, after all, the pressure will take some time to increase. Wherever I put the green arrows, the pressure will take some time to rise. No, after all, even if there's a bleeding or it is due to malignancy, the pressure is gonna increase gradually. So if I increase the pressure here, if I just make these arrows bigger, I just want to highlight that if the pressure will increase even much more than normal, then even the ventricles of this patient will be crushed. Initially, when cardiac tamponade is developing, you will be having pressure that will only occlude the atria, because atria are ones which are operating at lesser pressure. But when the pressure increases further, then atria and ventricles both are crushed. Why I have described that is because lots of time there will be term written like low pressure cardiac tamponade. The query of most doctors is that on one hand you said cardiac tamponade is crushing the heart, then what do you mean by the word low pressure? Whenever you read the word low pressure cardiac tamponade, it means that at the moment the pressure is only crushing the atria. It is not able to restrict the ventricles. So at least some pumping action from the ventricles can be there. So in patients who are having low pressure cardiac tamponade, blood pressure will decrease but will not become unrecordable. Why it will decrease? Because atria will not be able to contribute to 30% filling of the ventricles. Therefore, in this condition, I am writing in low pressure cardiac tamponade, pulse will be weak but will not be absent. The learning for you guys is, if he says pulsus paradoxus is absent in, he knows the fact that you will straight away answer pulsus paradoxus is gonna be present in a patient of cardiac tamponade. He will say pulsus paradoxus is absent in a case of, your answer will be given as low pressure cardiac tamponade. I repeat the fact once again, meaning of the word low pressure cardiac tamponade is that only the atria are getting crushed, so they cannot contribute to the filling of the ventricle. So if input is less, the BP will decrease by approximately 30%, but pulse will still be felt. But if you crush both the atria and the, now there is no term like high pressure cardiac tamponade. There are two terms, low pressure cardiac tamponade and cardiac tamponade. There's nothing like a high pressure cardiac tamponade, but just to make you understand, I'm saying that if you artificially think like low pressure versus high pressure, low pressure is crushing only the atria, and high pressure cardiac tamponade, which is an unofficial term that I'm using before you, will crush both the atria and the ventricle, so the pulse will characteristically disappear. That's gonna be a very, a very characteristic description that I want you to remember. Paradoxus, why? Because the pulse is disappearing though the heart is beating, and only in the phase of inspiration. Now, I will teach you why it is gonna be during the phase of inspiration only, and the diagram that I'll make before you is only for understanding purposes. Nothing great from, I would say, MCQ yield. It's just to explain the concept of why the pulse is disappearing on only inspiration, because that's a common query that I get from a lot of young doctors like you. So let's have a look at this line diagram with respect to inspiration and expiration. I have already explained to you that whenever we take a deep breath, the blood is sucked towards the heart, more blood enters into your and my heart during the phase of inspiration, in contrast with expiration, where I have just drawn an arrow to be relatively of lesser magnitude from the vector perspective. This explains the fact that if more blood will enter into the right side of the heart during the phase of inspiration, I'm talking about normal at the movement, it's going to cause a little bit of septal deviation. You can very well see the interventricular septum will slightly move towards left to accommodate this blood. In all of us, every time we breathe in, septal deviation occurs. Therefore, due to the septal deviation, the cavity of the left ventricle in all of us becomes relatively smaller on deep inspiration. If left ventricular cavity will become smaller, the blood that can come in will be lesser, and if less will come in, less will go out, and if less will go out, the blood pressure of you and me falls on inspiration. Remember guys, I taught you JVP falls on inspiration in a normal chap. I repeat that again, normal chap, JVP falls on inspiration. Now I have proved to you that blood pressure of you and me will also fall on inspiration, but the moment you will expire, this septum will come back. When the septum will come back to its normal position, whatever was the deviation, septum will come back to normal position. The left ventricular cavity will become normal in size. Therefore, the end diastolic volume will also become normal in size. Therefore, the stroke volume will also come back to normal. The blood pressure will also come back to normal. I'm just trying to teach you that in a normal individual, the blood pressure of you and me varies with inspiration and expiration. During the phase of inspiration, the BP will be slightly less. Let me just put some values here before you to understand better. Let us say if I take your blood pressure when you are taking a deep breath and holding it there, it will be definitely lesser than 120. It will be suppose 115 millimeters of mercury. But on the other hand, when you will expire and I'm going to check your BP, it's going to be something in the range of about 120. So the difference between inspiration and expiration, please remember this fact carefully. In a normal individual, the difference of blood pressure between inspiration and expiration is always less than 10 millimeter of mercury. On the other hand, if a chap is suffering from cardiac tamponade, now this is what I'm going to show here. This is cardiac tamponade. There's a lot of fluid outside the heart. It's pressing on the heart from outside. This is a two-dimensional diagram, guys. But what I'm saying is this fluid, when it will press on the heart from outside, it will cause an exaggerated septal deviation. If I say exaggerated septal deviation, the left ventricular cavity size will reduce further. End diastolic volume will reduce further, stroke volume will reduce further, and the BP will also fall much more than normal. I want to tell you that during inspiration in a chap with cardiac tamponade, the fall will be much more than normal, because the difference of blood pressure now will be usually in excess of more than 12 millimeters of mercury. This is the technical definition. I told you normal individual, the difference between inspiration and expiration is something in the range of less than 10 millimeter of mercury. But if the difference is more than 12 millimeter of mercury, we call it pulsus paradoxus. That's the technical definition. The English explanation I've already given to you. That meaning of the word paradox is that pulse is disappearing. The phase of respiration I've already proved to you, and I mean the heart is still functioning. I mean there's no cardiac arrest present in this guy. I want to reiterate the fact that during checking of pulsus paradoxus, what kind of breathing is recommended for the patient, then your answer would be given as that do not ask the person to take a deep breath, hold it there. It will be counterproductive. You will simply tell the patient, sir, just breathe normally like you are, and you're going to check the blood pressure in inspiration versus expiration. Difference will be more than 12 millimeter of mercury. The logic here is exaggerated septal deviation, exaggerated fall in end diastolic volume. And in Harrison, this entire description that I've given you is called as reverse Barheim effect. This slide per se is primarily for understanding purposes. It really does not have any MCQ utility, because the concept is very simple and straightforward. Because the concept here is very simple and straightforward, that in a MCQ of cardiac tamponade, he can ask you the following findings. As in any cardiology question, he will ask you regarding pulse, blood pressure, heart sounds, and jugular venous pressure. This is what we have learned. The pulse in these patients will tend to disappear in the phase of inspiration, or the technical definition will be that the difference between inspiratory and expiratory pressure will be more than 12 millimeters of mercury. Because this patient will be having severe hypotension, obstructive shock, you have to go in for a echocardiographic guided pericardiocentesis. IV fluids will be futile. They will not help in increasing the blood pressure, rather they will worsen the condition of the heart. Because the heart sounds in this patient will be sounding distant, there's a lot of blood outside the heart, there is a malignant pericardial effusion of large size, so I can say muffled heart sounds. The JVP of this patient is what we discussed. One, the Y descent that happens in a normal person would be absent, or another way to describe this would be, because there is no fall, I might say non-pulsatile. You see, the logic is, normally you have pulsations in the JVP, it falls during inspiration. This fall will not be present in this patient because pressure is so high. It's literally crushing of the heart from outside. The query from most doctors is that you are saying pressure around the heart is more, so it should be causing a rise of JVP. We should be getting a Kussmaul sign. See, what I said for Kussmaul sign was it is a rise. But in this particular case, that pulsations cannot be present. The pressure is so high that the pulsations will totally be absent, because you will not be able to pick up the fall or the rise of it. So that's why I said non-pulsatile elevated JVP, because most guys have this query, sir, why is it non-pulsatile? It should be rather, it should be elevated and pulsatile. No guys, cardiac tamponade is a condition where there's a crushing of the heart to such a magnitude that the pulsations will disappear. Pulsations occur in normal person, but here, because of the pressure aspect, the pulsations will tend to disappear. So that's a very characteristic statement I have said, a very powerful statement that's to be remembered. Non-pulsatile elevated JVP is a feature that you see with superior vena cava thrombosis and patients of cardiac tamponade. I would rate this again as an important part of this entire discussion with respect to heart sounds. And even in the later part of the app, you will notice me talking about cardiac tamponade, low pressure cardiac tamponade. So you will notice that some parts might be repetition, but I've deliberately kept this on in the app so that you get more sensitized to this topic, because cardiac tamponade is something that is always asked either in surgery or in medicine in the exam. So let us just summarize the JVP findings for our patients. For the MCQs of the A wave, I've described you three possibilities. It could be large A wave, it could be absent A wave, or it could be super large A wave, that is Canon. For large A wave, it was stenotic lesions of the right side of the heart, tricuspid stenosis. But over and above tricuspid stenosis, he can even ask you regarding pulmonary artery hypertension, and then can also be long-standing mitral stenosis. Absent is going to be when the atria would be twitching, that is atrial fibrillation. Canon is going to be two tachyarrhythmias, VT and JT, and then can be complete heart block, or alternatively written as third degree heart block. The heart is slow, agreed that the heart is slow, but both atria and ventricles are contracting simultaneously. So he might just use the casual word AV dissociation. AV dissociation here simply implies lack of coordination between the two chambers. They're exhibiting a simultaneous contraction. Then would be an MCQ of absent X descent, which would be seen in a person of tricuspid regurgitation. And if I exaggerate the tricuspid regurgitation, I can be having a CV wave, and after which I will be getting is a steep Y descent. The opposite MCQ of steep Y descent would be absent Y descent. This is going to be very characteristic, where the heart cannot relax. I mean, surprising condition where heart cannot relax would be cardiac tamponade, two grades of it, low pressure cardiac tamponade and routine cardiac tamponade. And pulsus paradoxus is not seen in low pressure cardiac tamponade. That's again a MCQ that I taught you. To the end of this discussion, I'll again say two very important, powerful statements, and they love to ask about it because they're given in the end of the discussion. So lots of multiple choice questions would be actually revolving around what I'm saying at the moment: steep X and steep Y, and steep X and absent Y descent. For absent Y, nobody would ever have issues because I've already explained this to you. We have had a quick chat regarding why cardiac tamponade, the heart can't relax, because there's pressure. You can use it as third space. You can call it intrapericardial pressure, which is going to squeeze the ventricles from outside. That leaves you with one data to remember. Steep X and steep Y is seen in a condition where we read a auscultatory finding by the name of pericardial shudder. Remember in Heart Sounds 1, I described pericardial shudder to you. What condition that we discussed there? That was constrictive pericarditis. So another terminology which is to be remembered over and above pericardial shudder for constrictive pericarditis is this JVP finding of a steep X and a steep Y. And lots of time you will notice that in multiple choice questions, because the routine data is anyway, remembered by majority of doctors, he would love to ask you regarding this finding of constrictive pericarditis, where you even get a Kussmaul sign. But Kussmaul sign is a rise of the JVP. It's a rise of the JVP. You will not be able to see either the rise or fall in cardiac tamponade. That's why I said the word non-pulsatile elevated JVP. So I'm squeezing that information once again. There are only two scenarios in cardiology where you will read non-pulsatile elevated JVP. One is a pathology related to superior vena cava. Second is gonna be either hemopericardium, that could be like a car crash with a seat without a seat belt, or it could even be a blow to the chest, in assault case, or for that matter of fact, even malignancies can contribute to it. So if you can get this table imprinted in your brain, I'm very sure that you would be on your way to cracking questions and clearing the exam. And thank you so much for your patience and hearing me out. And I assure you the fact that if you get these first 3 lectures right, then in those long stem questions, when they incorporate information of heart sound, when they incorporate information about JVP, a lot of these questions can be solved by simply focusing on the fundamental aspects that are described in heart sound 1, 2, and 3. So keep the pressure on, keep hammering, keep learning new facts every day. 1 new video a day is mandatory, and I would like you to, in fact, go through the early part of the app where I've described hacks to crack NEET PG. My point is simply to motivate you, to get you into that groove, to get you into that mindset of, yes, I have to do it, because ultimately it becomes too overbearing. When you scroll through the app, there are so many videos to be done. After a few days, the energy tends to dip down. But if you keep the pressure on, pressure on from the perspective of, yes, I'm gonna do it, then gradually you will realize that you will start enjoying this process. So initially learning is always a pain. We've all gone through it. Even when I read about JVP and the various waves for the first time, relation with all these aspects, it was like, oh man, what am I doing with my life? But then subsequently, once you start seeing patients, once you start getting questions correct, the biggest kick for any doctor at the moment is when he gets those MCQs correct. When you're solving a custom module, you're doing a cardiology question and the question goes correct, you feel confident about yourself. So I want you to develop that as a habit of doing questions daily and keep on reading the facts, and you will be through with your exams. Thank you so much for your patience.